Welcome and good evening. This is the January 28th, 2019 meeting of the Coeur d'Alene Parks and Recreation Commission. We'll start the meeting with roll call.
Commissioner Cranston.
Here.
Commissioner McDowell.
Here.
Commissioner Lean.
Here.
Commissioner Tate.
Here.
Commissioner Hill. Commissioner Wood.
Here.
Commissioner Edinger.
Here.
Commissioner Kinnard.
Here.
Thank you, Melissa. Jim, would you lead the room in the Pledge of Allegiance today? Sure.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Do any of the commissioners tonight have any conflict of interest with any of the agenda items?
None here.
No, sir.
There are none. Let's move on to approval of the November 19th, 2018 meeting minutes.
I shall move.
Second.
It's been moved by Commissioner Edinger and seconded by Commissioner McDowell to approve the meeting minutes of November 19th, 2018. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Minutes are approved. Thank you. I've got a few comments coming up here, Bill, that will kind of address what's happening here in the meeting tonight and future meetings on our one agenda item tonight, but let's kind of stay in order of the agenda and have the staff report.
Thank you, Commissioners. Thanks everyone for being here. I'm glad we had a good turnout because we want to show you all what we've been working on for a year and a half, and so as we move forward. We had our third swinging bench installed here by our staff at McEwen. It's up and running. We got everything in place, and it's over behind the K27 water feature. So that gives us our third and final one. I think we've got enough benches of that design in McEwen. We also, through some donations, the Softball Association gave us some funds. We were able to get Sunset 2 lit. So we've got another softball field that we can use in the evening. And then we completed the relocation of Central Dog Park from the location that was on the church's site to wrap around the pickleball courts. And so that's all done. And our staff did a really good job. Monty McCulley and this gentleman here, Jared Odell, next to me, had a hand in getting all that stuff done. So we saved a lot of money by doing all the work in-house except for the fencing work. We subbed that out. So, and that's all I have on updates.
Okay. Any questions for Bill? Thank you, Bill. Well, tonight's meeting has one agenda item, and that's going to do with the conceptual plan for the Atlas Mill property in our waterfront, public, and park spaces. This is going to be the first kind of formal presentation, information only, presented by the design team of what's been conceptualized so far. This group will probably have some questions of the design team regarding the plan that's reviewed tonight, but there will be no formal recommendation of any kind that will be forwarded on from this meeting to council. This, again, is an information only, where we can see the plan as it's developed today. There's going to be future public meetings on the same subject moving forward. The next scheduled meeting, Bill, will be an open house to the community on
Correct.
what
So
date?
that open house with you is going to be on the 25th of February here in the same room. After this evening, this goes on the road to the park, to the Ped Bike Committee on the 13th. It goes on to Ignite to have them look at it as well. And then it comes back to you in this open house form, so that we take all of the public's input like we've done over the years. When every time we build a park, we set up some tables along the back, and there's an opportunity for everybody to weigh in on things. So that's some of that public input that you're talking about.
Kind of being that this is really kind of be the first time as a group, we'll be able to kind of see the plan and be able to respond to it in any fashion. We hadn't planned any public comment at this point on
That's
the
correct.
plan, given its rollout here.
Right.
Why, can you speak a little bit to, opportunities moving forward and kind of the processes where the community can provide comment
So we're.
on the process?
Right,
or
so
on the
what we're doing
plan?
here now is just that. We're trying to get this plan out there so folks can see it and comment on it. We're putting it out here this way so they can look at it. It'll be available online. And I hadn't thought through whether or not we would start taking maybe public comment through emails. We could certainly look at that. But our thought was your next meeting is we're really going to sit down and crunch this thing up and look at it. You guys have got some ideas about some of the layout I've heard already, but we thought we'd leave it the way that it is, the way it was. And what this is, the data was collected on about, well, there weren't 47 meetings, but there were 47 opportunities for the public to see what we're doing. And some of you commissioners attended those meetings. In fact, it goes back starting December 20th to 17th is what we kicked it off. And then we had meetings all the way through there up until the mayor spoke about this on January 9th and 18th at the State of the City discussing what we were going to do about purchasing this site. And it goes on to Coeur Vision Group meeting on February 7th, February 21, press release summarizing the results from that meeting. March 7th, written comments updated, including written responses received at the Coeur Vision Group meetings. So they just go on like this up until today, where we have now, with today, 48 opportunities for people to see what we're up to. And I think we're doing a good job at getting this out in front of the folks. But on the next meeting is when they have a chance really to dive in and make public comments.
Of course, anything in written form would be very
Very welcome. You
advantageous
betcha.
for us as well. Do any other commissioners have comments or?
Go ahead.
Scott, I guess in terms of written comment, we'd want that probably directed through Bill at the Parks Department. So
Yeah,
that
we
have
could take it directly through the Parks Department.
Okay.
Christie?
Mr. Chair? Well, thank you for clarifying that. I do know that there's been some concern of late out in some of the community about how this process is going. And obviously, people have shown up, they're interested, they probably live near there, they probably walk the trails, they're anticipating a gorgeous park, which we all are. I guess I just really want to dispel any kind of, when it comes to process, this group, as well as the Centennial Trail Foundation, the Bike Ped Committee, they're all people that care about obtaining, preserving, protecting public space, just like all of you. And that's our goal. We want to make this fantastic for the public. So we're not going to move ahead and do anything in the, the dark of the night. Everything's going to be a public meeting. We're going to take all kinds of input. Some of us have been contacted individually with input, and we happen to agree with some of that input. And you'll probably see some of that tonight. So I just want you to be assured there'll be many opportunities for you to provide your input, and we'll gladly take it.
Well, I think as a group too, we don't want to rush the process.
Right.
Especially as design development is occurring, so. Anybody else? Okay, thank you. So now, in our agenda is reserved an opportunity for public comments, typically for items to address this group that aren't on the agenda. But are there people out there at this point wishing to make any comment? Okay. Thank you. Okay, Bill, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, and you in turn can give it over to Dell.
Scott?
Yes. Yeah, please come up. Susie, if you would, just state your name and address for the record. And
Susie Snedeker, no address, city. I'm a little confused, having dealt with this issue for the issue of the development that involved regarding the Atlas site for the past 4.5 years. I was absolutely stunned. I'm sorry, I've had an allergy attack today, so I'm not breathing well. Absolutely stunned to be told that this is on the agenda this evening. I looked and it's not on the agenda. It wasn't even on the website. So, public participation, as we know, is the most important thing that the city offers, no matter what commission you're on or if you're on the council itself. I really think that the lack of notice is a real issue, because I know a number of people who would have attended this meeting gladly had they known, just for information, not necessarily to speak. So it's my little protest that maybe this isn't the time, and maybe it wasn't publicized to the best of my knowledge and belief. And maybe other people feel the same way. But I know that I got a call at 11 o'clock this morning saying, do you know what's going on? And after 4.5 years of actively dealing with these issues, especially parkland, for 4.5 years, not to know of a meeting with the intention of the caliber of this development or this proposed plan, to me is unfortunate. Thanks, Scott.
Thanks, Susie. Bill, was there,
There's another guy.
there was something with the publishing of
Correct.
the meeting
And there was
agenda
a- there was a
versus what we
mistake.
had
There-
for a workshop
Yes.
2 weeks ago?
Yeah, there was a mistake made. So we posted this, and the posting went out like it normally does, but at the admin level, they reposted the workshop agenda and not this agenda. So there was a mistake that was made, and it was not done with intent, because again, like I said, we've been trying to be as transparent, and as I demonstrated with 47, now 48 different meetings on this topic. There's no way that we're going to try and do anything, underhanded or, backdoor or anything like that. And I'm really sorry that the mistake was made, but it was made. And we're here to get the public's input on this, not tonight, but we're giving them an opportunity to see this. And we certainly want their input moving forward, as we have throughout this whole process. So there was a mistake that was made.
Okay. Mike?
And this is being recorded, so it will be rebroadcast
That's
on
correct,
cable
and that's, yes.
for others that maybe aren't able because of this error in the way it was posted.
Correct.
They still have the opportunity to see this at multiple occasions, multiple times.
Correct.
And see the presentation in its entirety.
Yeah, for the next month. So hopefully everybody's going to talk, and it'll get out there, and they'll be at our next meeting for the workshop that we'll have with the public next month.
Okay. Christie?
Chair. And I guess we could just kind of consider, I wouldn't be opposed of doing a repeat between now and then, just to address the mistake. Obviously, it was not intended, but I don't mind showing up and doing it all over.
Okay. Something to consider. Yes, come on up.
Terry Godbout, Forest Drive. I am really confused. Is this parkland that we're going to see? Is that the name of the project? Because that's the only thing on the agenda.
It hasn't been given any formal name that I'm aware of,
Okay.
other than,
So Terry, that's a
the
rollover from
waterfront
our
park
workshop.
spaces in Atlas.
That's a rollover from our workshop, because we were discussing parkland in this whole area, and so I apologize, it was not clear to you. Again, it wasn't done with the intent to mislead anybody.
Right.
Because we were talking about, at our workshop, about other items besides this parcel. So we were
Okay.
just calling it
So
parkland.
even with the lately released agenda, there's no mention here of the Riverstone Atlas project in the agenda, which I'm looking at right here. So I just want to make that point. Also, I was the one who emailed the city at 11:30 this morning, and I said, where is the agenda for tonight's meeting? And there was a whole bunch of scurrying, which resulted in the January 14th agenda being reposted to the city's website. And finally, at 2 p.m. today, 3.5 hours before the meeting, the correct agenda was posted, but it did not show anything about the Riverstone Atlas So just want to make that point.
I believe what we're going to see, and probably if, in hindsight, it probably should have been a little clearer that this would have been the park concept plan for Atlas Mill property.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Okay, let's go ahead and move forward with the presentation, Bill. I'll let you kind of give any introductory comments you like and introduce Dell and what we're going to see tonight.
So Welsh Comer has been working on this with our architect Dell Hatch with Bernardo Wills. Taylor Tomke's here, pinch hitting for Phil. He's under the weather. So with that, I'll just bring up those two gentlemen, and I think they're both going to show up. I don't know if just Dell's going to do it or not, but have them come up and start the presentation.
Okay.
Good evening, I'm Del Hatch, 6775 Davenport Street in Dalton Gardens. Thank you, Chairman Cranston and members of the commission. I will open this meeting. Let me get it open here. This presentation tonight is an update from our workshop with you a couple of weeks ago. That was a fairly long workshop. The presentation you'll see contains most of what we saw in that meeting, but it's been shortened for this meeting somewhat. Some of the things that we want to try and cover tonight, we'll give you a very brief overview of the overall Atlas project at the stage it is today, but we want to focus on the public spaces. We want to focus on the pedestrian and bicycle or wheeled trails throughout the project, primarily on the waterfront. We want to talk about different opportunities for waterfront access for the public. Docks, day use, swimming, kayak launch will all be part of what we'll see tonight in concept. Again, all of these drawings that you'll see tonight are just that, concepts, and you'll see alternatives to those concepts. So we're not at the stage yet where we can show you anything that's hardline or definitive at this point.
Dale, as you kind of proceed through your presentation, can you kind of help for our review, kind of identify some of those elements in the plan that are responding to some of the public comments and park elements that people wanted to see in there? I think that'll be kind of helpful for this group to see how that gets incorporated into the plan.
Absolutely. I'll be as thorough as I can, and if I've forgotten anything, just prompt me and I'll go back to it.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, are we asking questions as we go, or are we waiting to the end?
Dale, how is it best going to work for you?
I think in terms of the time that we have tonight, again, this is a fairly short presentation compared to what we had in the workshop. So I think if you have questions as I'm moving through it, I think that's fine. We can address them at that point.
Okay, very good.
Okay. And then at the very end, we'll talk about the next steps. Bill's already covered a few of the meetings that'll be coming up, but we have a schedule that we can put up so everybody can take a look at it. So the first thing I'll do is give you an overview of the master plan of the entire Atlas project as it stands today. It's still in that design development stage, so there's nothing hard and fast about this, but the framework of it is still pretty close. So to the north is Celtice along the top up here, Riverstone Park in this area through here, some of the apartment and housing development that's happened recently between Riverstone Park and the Atlas project and the Atlas property. What we're going to be talking about tonight is the waterfront portion that moves basically as you follow my cursor through here and all the way along here, taking up the entire waterfront of the project. One thing to note as we move into the presentation in the later stages, we're going to talk about waterfront access opportunities for the public that would be able to get people right down close and actually to the water itself. Those happen at different points along the shoreline. through this area. There is a planned swimming beach in this area. East of that, there is a planned water dog park in that area. This plan incorporates the use of the Centennial Trail, and it also is adding additional trails throughout this waterfront corridor. There are a couple of commercial properties that are planned, one in this area adjacent in a enlarged area of our waterfront. Recreation, another one down on the far west end. Of note on this drawing is the orientation of the project development and its streets, how a lot of these streets are set in perpendicular fashion to the waterfront. And a lot of these access points that we'll talk about later happen in conjunction with those, because when we talk about waterfront access, we're not only talking about physical access, but we're talking about visual access as well. So these roadways are considered visual corridors to the water from the entire development itself. Any questions on that? Oh, excuse me. So I'll jump right into it. Let me just give you some orientation. We're primarily at this point going to start talking about this enlarged area here. I'll call it a node of the waterfront recreation space. I would liken it to a size of a neighborhood park, but we're not looking at it as a park. We're looking at it as an entire waterfront recreational opportunity here. So we're going to start in this area. We're going to move down eastward to the central portion near the swim beach, the dog park, and we're going to look down here a little bit further to the east on how this project may come together. So in that area, that enlarged area, these are some of the main project roads that I talked about, always set up perpendicular to the waterfront. This is Suzanne. It accesses off of the Riverstone development and comes into this area through here, and this blue highlights that it becomes one of the major visual corridors to the waterfront. This area through here will all be a green space. The C stands for that commercial lot that I pointed out earlier when we were looking at the overall development concept. Some of these circular areas here and down in through here, you'll see more of those later in the presentation moving westward. Those are some of the specific areas we've looked at to date as these water access opportunities. So this space through here, I should back up and let you know that since we've had the workshop with you, we met with the Centennial Trail Foundation. It was a very brief presentation. We took some input from that, and we've altered some of our earliest concepts to incorporate a couple of those ideas. One of those ideas was, this is the existing Centennial Trail moving north to the Prairie Trail. One of the comments was, if you're traveling south, how do you actually get to the waterfront? This area through here is being planned for residential development. We have some severe grades through here. One of our thoughts was potentially to move it down and cross through here, but it would be an additional crossing at that point. We have an established crossing here, so at this point, one of the alternative routes might be to come down the extension of Suzanne, cross into the park, and then move down to the waterfront in that fashion. The other suggestion that was made is that in this particular area, we're proposing an opportunity for a non-motorized launch down here on the river in that location there. We were going to provide accessible stalls in this area for people bringing a vehicle, maybe pulling a trailer, and how might they be able to access that. Originally, we had it set up as a back-in situation, but the recommendation was, is there any way to develop it as more of a pull-through? So you can see the title on this slide is called the Waterfront Loop Road Concept. I'll show you two concepts tonight. But the loop road starts at this point where this main project road would split adjacent this neighborhood park area. Within that park, we have parking of about 60, mid-60s, 65, 67, set up to access this area. We are proposing a restroom and shelter. We're proposing a children's play area in this area on the water side versus the road side of that shelter. The remainder of this is looked to be left fairly open, but green. Not a lot of plantings in the center. Again, that corridor, that visual corridor, we think is important. And then we have access down to the water here. So the trails that you see, if it's colored in a yellowish orange, is considered to be the wheeled section of access trails that are on the waterfront. If it's a light green in this fashion, this would be the pedestrian side. So the pedestrian walking side is always on the water side, and the wheeled side are usually always on the back. Now, there will be situations where we have to cross some of those situations. This happens to be one of them, another one potentially down here. So if you were wanting to launch your, oh, excuse me.
Dale, thank you. I just wanted, I think there's going to be probably a lot of questions about the road you mentioned, but I'm more interested at the moment in the, you said the non-motorized launch.
Mm-hmm.
I assume, Bill, that's kayaks, canoes. What do we currently have available in the city?
So what we're looking for is we would like to see an accessible kayak launch that could be used by folks that have that need and other folks that aren't necessarily needing that accommodation. So I was trying to get one of those put in a few years ago, you may remember, and we lost out on getting that at East Hub. So this is what this is designed for. And then there's some conversations that have been running around as well about an accessible beach access for those folks as well, not just the kayaks, but this is an opportunity for us to provide wheeled access maybe to the water's edge to get people into the water who may be in a chair as well.
So you mean for disabled people?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Again, that area that we're talking about, having the launch opportunity happens here. There will be an accessible route up this slope. All along the waterfront, there are different degrees of elevational change. In this particular area, it starts to flatten out into the most shallow slopes along the river bank. You would park here, access down to the trail, cross with your canoe, kayak, and this one was set up, would be a accessible launch. This area was chosen, one of the reasons it was chosen is sort of a natural protrusion out from the riverbank, a jetty, if you will. It was used historically for loading barges and things like that. We think it also may prove to be an opportunity as an overlook, public overlook, and on this side also an opportunity to get people down to the water. You'll see that as we move forward. So I guess why a waterfront loop road? The idea of a waterfront loop road was that it's a one-way system moving eastward, very narrow roads, a one-way system moving westward and back. You can see that we're looking at the potential of whether or not there might be some back-end parking on that upper stretch. There's quite an elevational change from this point down to this point. We also have quite a few mature ponderosa pine in that area as well. It's one of the natural features that we're looking to work around and to retain that. The loop road is envisioned as almost a national park type road. Again, very narrow, very slow speeds, moving eastward from this point. I'll move down as we go. Are there any other questions I can answer with regard to how this is set up right now?
Dale, are you going to get more, are your photos going to be more specific?
Yes, some of the ones that in the second portion of the presentation, they get very specific in terms of what these things might look like.
And the road?
And the roads,
Okay,
yes.
I'll wait.
All
Thanks.
conceptual, of course, but.
Okay.
So that match line that we just cut off from here would pick up here. The loop road, as you would move eastward, would follow this direction and would have a turnaround and return. On the upper part of the slope, there's actually, through the center of this, there's a grade change as well that continues. So it's much higher here in the neighborhood of 12 to even 14 feet on this upper portion down to this portion through here. The loop road would have an opportunity to have parallel parking at points along it that could correspond to the swimming beach access, correspond to the water dog park access, So some of the potential, as Bill mentioned, if there's an opportunity to develop that accessible route to the water, some of the parking through here could lead you to that.
Dale,
Yes, sir.
you mentioned it was a narrow road. Do you have an estimation of how narrow?
Yeah,
Wide?
right now, we're contemplating as narrow as 10, but as wide as 12. So how can that be achieved? Because I mentioned the grade differential between those two levels. The road would have to start climbing at this point, being supported by retaining walls to do that. We'd come up around to another retaining wall that would support some cut through here until it got to about that point when it reaches the top of that bank. This return road to the west would be placed right at the top of the bank. The Centennial Trail through here right now is very close to the top of the bank. So a concept that would incorporate a return loop road would have to shift the Centennial Trail slightly to the north or the east, northeast in that direction to accommodate both of those. We do have a separation between what would be the loop road and the trail through their vegetative separation. The other opportunity that we're looking at in this location, because we have the Centennial Trail moving through here, we have trails from Riverstone Park that come down and abut the trail. What we're looking to do, and one of the ideas of what does the loop road serve, is we're trying to make as strong a connection from Riverstone Park as we can to the waterfront and the continuation through the Atlas property. We think that this helps to do it by getting people parked a little bit closer to utilize the waterfront activities in this area, and possibly for people as almost more of a scenic loop along this area through here. So the Centennial Trail stays high in the vicinity that it is today. We're looking at crossing pedestrians down into this area. We're also looking for the opportunity to pull users of the Centennial Trail down to the waterfront through here so that we can have both the wheeled side of the trail on the upland and the pedestrian side on the waterfront. So peeling off the trail in this fashion or moving from Riverstone in this fashion. We think there's an opportunity in this location to create what we'll term for now an orientation type of a plaza. Since people are moving through on the trail at bikes at some speed, some sort of an orientation to alert them that there's some crossing activity that could occur here. It's been suggested that there might be an opportunity to install some public art where that asterisk is located. So we think that development, we think it has an opportunity to help with this connection, stronger connection to Riverstone Park. We think that it may be appropriate to have some buffer between this water dog park and some of the private lots that exist in this area. We think there may be opportunities to expand some of the widths of walks in Riverstone in this area to make this green space more usable. If the walks were widened, maybe there's opportunities for fairs or events or things like that to occur. Any questions on that section?
Yes. Is this the time to talk about the road, Dell?
Sure.
Okay. Well, I'm on this site almost every day with my dog. We have to have something to do. And I'm super excited about it because it's just going to be a beautiful park for the public. But I am a little concerned, and of course, we had a little bit of a field trip today to the site, and we could really visualize how much room there is to work with. So I'm a little concerned about that switchback road, but I am also adamant that there has to be access to first responders. They have to be able to reach the waterfront and the beach. And so I guess I'm interested in what the other commissioners think too. The road seems just a little like it kind of takes up most of the space. And honestly, I don't know whether police or fire would find it workable. And I know, Bill, you had talked about including police and fire in the conversations. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I've sent this plan to Kenny, Chief Gabriel. I haven't talked to Lee about it yet. But after we saw this, I have reservations about this design too. And Dell and I have talked about this some, and I think he's going to, in his next coming slides, are going to maybe address some of that stuff. But I don't. I think fire and police could have access with the trail. Right now, currently, here at McEwen, they have access to the Harbor House and to rescue through our trail system in the park. They don't have a real road, they just have an access. And so I think it's critical, like you said, that they have access. But what that access looks like, I don't know, but it doesn't have to be a road.
Comments?
Not to leave you hanging, I have
No.
the same concerns. So
Yeah, I
I
just,
think it needs to be looked at a little
well,
bit.
it's a good thing it's conceptual. You do beautiful work, but obviously you're going to get a lot of feedback and changes will be made.
Okay. Any other questions on that section? So what might that look like? There's a very, again, conceptual sketch of what it might look like as we would climb through this area, continual climb until you get up on the top of this sloping bank that you see here. That bank does have quite a bit of tree cover on it. They're not necessarily mature trees, but they're volunteer, mostly ponderosa pine that have initiated over the years. So there are some trees through this area. This represents the dog park through here. What that area for a orientation plaza might be accessed through from McEwen, the trails coming down and then splitting once they get down into the lower flat. We've looked at areas beyond it. Technically, the project stops in this area, but we've looked further to the east to see if there might be some opportunities to consolidate some issues that occur, and one of those that we're looking at is this crossing of Beebe with the Centennial Trail. Today it approaches to here, you move diagonally across the road to that point, and then the center line of the trail follows through the middle of that section through there. One idea that we've looked at is could the crossing become more straight across and a little more controlled or safe? The trail be on the lower side, eventually gaining grade and joining up with its existing alignment through there. So all of these areas, this would create more open green space. There's green space that exists on either side of it today. Private lots all the way up into Riverstone. This is existing Riverstone parking lot.
Del, what you're saying is though, is you'd tear up the existing trail and move it.
Yes, it would be moved more in this alignment. Now, where it changes direction could happen through here, through there. We think the crossing could benefit from having a straighter shot across Beebe.
So my only concern with that, and I'm sure the other commissioners have comments as well, we're focused on Atlas, and we have a limited amount of money for Atlas, which right now is just a big pit. And so I don't know, it seems like a big expense to tear up an existing trail, to align it. I guess I'm not really warm to that. I'd like to just see us focus entirely on Atlas with the funds that we have.
Okay?
Thoughts?
Any comments?
And Commissioner, that crossing is interesting. I don't have the data, but I don't know if we've had any accidents at that crossing. I know it's funky.
Yeah.
And it would be nice to line it up, but I don't know if it's that critical. And I'm
I
with
don't
you to
think
say,
so.
why tear up an existing bike path that's already well-established?
Well, it's a lot of expense, you don't get a lot of gain, and it just seems irresponsible. But I'm there a lot, again, with the dog, and it's not a big deal to walk just a few feet down and get on the other trail. So I don't know that you gain a lot, but you lose a lot of money that we'd like to put into Atlas.
Yeah, and I've gone down there, and I like where the current trail is. You're really, as you're going through, you see the river, but you also are part of the park.
Yeah.
I think as there's activities there, that keeps you up in the park. If you move it down, it looks like there's going to be some more homes down there, and you're almost in their backyard or their front door. Where it currently sits has nice views, and it keeps you into the Riverstone
Yeah,
Park.
I agree.
Yeah.
I think one thing that is a concern for me is as you get closer to the park and proceed north, I worry about traffic for those kids coming out of the park, coming out of the apartments, crossing a couple trails and a potential street. So that is one thing that we have really been looking at.
Just to clarify, if they're moving down to the waterfront,
If they're even moving just along the Centennial Trail, but exiting their homes and coming to the trail, I want to make sure they have that direct access that they still have, and then some safety crossing points.
yes. Through these areas where there's some residences in here and then up into this area where there are some apartments and such, there's still direct access out and onto the Centennial Trail in those locations. But if you were moving straight down to the water, you're correct. You would cross this upper narrow road, down a slope, across the other narrow road as well.
And I know we'll hear plenty of comments on it, and I welcome those. Just know that we are looking at that. We're trying to make sure it's a safe crossing, because kids don't necessarily want to cross where the path, as adults, we think it should be. They'll want to cross where they want to cross.
True.
Okay?
Okay.
So this alternative concept would also, it looks at getting people in a vehicular movement to the east. Everything that you see and what you saw before within this neighborhood park area is the same. The location of the potential playground, the restroom shelter, the parking that's set up, the access routes down from the north. But instead of the split national park type road, it's now a two-way route following what would have been the eastbound of that loop road, but it is now two-way through here, still has the same opportunities for pull-through parking to access down to the water in that location. We have trails below it on the water side, the wheeled trail, pedestrian trail here, the existing Centennial Trail moving in that fashion. As it moves into the central portion, there is no longer the idea of the turnaround that we had before. This road stays at the bottom of the slope. The Centennial Trail stays at the top of the slope in the configuration it is today. The one thing that we have looked at is how do we make that strong connection to Riverstone through here without the introducing more pedestrian vehicular conflicts. And one of the concepts was, could we start back here into Riverstone Park, start to lower the grade dramatically to get under the trail, keep it going to get under the roadway, and then open it up into the area above the dog park. In a sense, this option of a two-way waterfront access road, the retaining walls that would have gone into the looped return, those retaining walls would go into some sort of an access to cross both the path and the road.
Dale, on this plan, where does the road, I'm not sure where the road goes to.
The access road, I'll back up here. Whoop. The access road comes around our neighborhood park component, loops down on the lower level of the slope that runs through here and continues eastward. It's picked up again here. It's at the bottom of that slope and continues all the way eastward, eventually connecting to Beebe.
I like that.
And in concept, again, broad concept, what might that look like? Again, excavation back into this portion of Riverstone Park. For your information, the restroom shelter kind of sits in that location. Retaining walls that get you down to a grade that you can get below the Centennial Trail. Continuing between them down so you could get below the roadway and then open into the waterfront. The wheeled section of the trail, again, always on the upland side, the pedestrian on the lower side. Now through this section, they have to be essentially combined, but they could split on this side. There could be an access that peels off the Centennial Trail to get you to that lower elevation at that point. This trail would still abut the Centennial Trail where it does today. Dog park down below. both options would require some significant earthwork and significant retaining walls to accomplish that connection without any interference or potential conflicts.
Well, Dell, I'm looking forward to police and fire working with you and Bill, because they might not need all of that. You got to balance, what does the public need? What kind of access do they need to get down there to unload and leave? And then what do your emergency responders need? And so it'll be interesting to see what comes out of that conversation. I don't like to put a lot of pavement and spend money on pavement when we want to doll up the park, but I absolutely want some sort of access. So it'll be interesting to see where you all end up.
Yeah, well, we'll make sure that in discussions with Bill and fire and police that we address and get their input on that. So again, if it were to continue on, and I apologize, this is not the route. That road, I apologize, we have the wrong slide in here. This is the one I showed you previously. But the road would continue down and connect into Beebe at this point. This, again, trying to straighten this up so that we have the crossing through here. And then the Centennial Trail would be paralleling it and at some point kicking back up into the existing alignment. So really looking at, is there a need to do this? And again, we can get the input on if people feel that there's a need to make that a little safer, shorter crossing. If not, then there's no need to come down this far to develop it. But if there's a through road, it basically has to come over and connect to Beebe. Any questions on that?
Well, I guess I would offer one comment. I think from an emergency response perspective, having two access points, one at the east, one from the northwest, I think would be advantageous should something happen blocking one of those.
Yeah, I think there'll be a lot of conversation around what will can a fire truck be on? Can they get, and Bill knows this more than me, the existing trail that we have right now, can the fire truck go on it?
Yes, we designed that for fire rated, with ladder truck. So one of the big to come in. So the trail that runs at the base of Tubbs Hill and all the other trails around it, and including the plaza, was designed, rated rather for a fire truck.
Right.
Yeah. I'll just mention that the radius that was shown in that loop road return was set up to accommodate the radius of a fire truck.
Right. Thank you.
Okay, any questions before I move on a little bit?
I do, Del. So one thing, we talked about some other options, and I love what you're doing here and just making people think and see all the different concepts. Have we put together anything where the road is one way? We talked about that some. And then also no road at all, and just having the path connect up to the Prairie Trail. Everybody calls that the Centennial Trail, but it's really the Prairie Trail. And then tie it back into the waterfront piece.
We haven't developed one yet
Okay.
that has a one-way, but if it were a one-way, it would probably follow the same orientation and or alignment and would be at the lower portion of the slope.
Right. But
Maintaining the.
and just narrower and open up more park space.
Correct, and
Right.
depending on which direction, whether it becomes west to east,
Right.
east to west, we haven't explored it other than just in conversations with you the other day.
Right, and then this concept, we talked about going under, and we talked about utilizing the existing elevation to try to go over.
Yes, we did talk about the potential to go over both the Centennial Trail and if there was a vehicular road below it. I don't have that
Okay,
one
yeah, no,
fully
just,
developed.
so there's just lots of great energy and good discussion about all the what ifs.
There's still quite a few
Right.
options that we're looking at. There's always the option, as Bill mentioned, that there is no vehicular access beyond that large neighborhood park node of our waterfront. So there's always that option to not put any roads in. The idea of the loop road and frankly the waterfront road were looked at for emergency access, looked at for both having parallel parking along them, get people down in some of these areas closer to the dog park and the swimming beach.
And Dell, if we didn't have a road at all, it still would be imperative that there was something there that made it accessible to first responders. I don't know if anybody knows anyone who's had a heart attack. I haven't, but I know people. You know, yeah, your first responders, they can hike in from wherever. It's going to take them 10 or 15 minutes, and does anybody have that kind of time? So in this design, whether it's a road or whether it's some sort of quick access, it just has to be there.
Yeah, and I think like Bill mentioned, the trail itself, the existing trail, is definitely wide enough at 16 feet through this area, through here. And I know it's been designed to support them. They have vehicles on there for maintenance all the time, so I don't think the issue is could they not use this. It's probably more from once they're here, getting down the slope into the water.
Right.
And are there opportunities to have spurs that might peel down to certain areas, the dog beach or the swimming beach? Certainly. I think there's opportunities to look at that as well.
Great.
Look forward to that opportunity.
Okay, so I mentioned to you that there's a second portion, let's see here, a second portion of this presentation where we're going to talk about a couple of detailed elements here. During some of the public meetings that were held that Bill was referencing, the input, there were options given to people for what their preferences might be in terms of the character of the way this waterfront and this neighborhood section of a park-like area might be developed. We hope to develop a children's playground in that area, and most positive responses were for more of a natural-looking playground, or what is termed nature play, where there are elements of logs or trees or stones that are created. They're artificial, they look very real, but there are climbing elements that come up onto them. These are designed for the appropriate fall heights, etc. So this would be the character of some of the elements within the playground that we're considering right now. Some might be slightly more structured, as this one suggests the appearance of a log jam or something, but they're basically climbing elements for the kids to interact on, come in different sizes, etc. So keep in mind that's the idea of the character. Again, the other response we had from a lot of the public was not only this park component, but all of the waterfront was to be left as natural as possible. So as we talk about that, let's talk about what that means and what it takes to develop some access to the water. Along this stretch of the river, there are some severe erosion conditions. There are different soils that have been placed along that river over the years. And we have some existing fairly mature ponderosa pine. They're right at the shoreline where the wave action, the wake action, the current, and the fact that the river changes elevation substantially throughout the year during the shoulder seasons, it causes some issues, as you might imagine. So we have to go in and mitigate and repair some of those areas so that we can actually create a permanent situation where people can actually get down to the water. And we can keep at bay some of those, that destructive action of the water along the shoreline. So you see here we're talking about the water access is aligning in areas with upland public space and the shoreline where it's deteriorating. There we have a wetland biologist who's assisting us with planting selections for some of these sloped areas that are going to be revegetated. We have a hydraulic engineer who's looking at telling us what kind of mitigation efforts have to be made to counteract some of this water movement and action that comes along the shoreline. That's what we're talking about in through here, but they also happen to correspond to some of those visual corridors that I showed you in the very opening slide, some of the roadway systems that of the overall Atlas project, where we want that visual opening and corridor down to the water, some of these access points we're talking about actually correspond to those. Some of these unstable areas where we're going to look at vegetation and rock to mitigate some of that, those also happen, we'll have to do that in some of the most severe conditions. Well, some of the access points we're looking at are all actually happen in some of the most severe conditions. So we're trying to kind of kill two birds with one stone in some of these areas that we're looking at. Try and do it very efficiently, as cost effective as we can. And again, quality vegetative areas, maybe more where it's feasible. So this drawing, I know that we shared this with you during the workshop. The different colored lines that move along the shoreline all through here are part of that hydraulic engineer's studies. The red suggests that we have some of the most severe conditions. We have different slope elevations from the west to the east, the western side having the highest elevation change from the top of the slope down to the water. And as we move to the east, it starts to shallow a little bit until we get down into this area where we're talking about the beach being the shallowest. So, for instance, in this area, it's anywhere from 7 to 2 feet, I believe, and then we move up into here, and it gets up into the 5 to 7 or 8, and up into here, it's as high as 10-foot difference from the top of the slope down to the water. These photographs represent some of those conditions that we are encountering along the shoreline. You can see almost a vertical sloughing and erosion in that condition. These areas indicate spots where people today are trying to get down to the water's edge, and as a result, they're using the same footpath and eroding it even further. Some of the photographs were taken during this time of year, actually in March of last year, so you can see the condition when the water's at its lowest level. These other photographs show it during the summer pool. So what we did is we looked at all of the conditions of what kind of vegetation exists today, what the severe slopes are, what the soil conditions are. Is it native soil? Has it been placed over time? Is that contributing to erosion? And we tried to look at those visual corridors through here and here, here, and here, and maintain them and correspond them to potential opportunities along the water. Severe conditions. These trees are spruce trees. They were actually planted on the property when it was still a mill site. The erosion is so severe through here that a lot of the roots are exposed, and we do not believe at this time we're going to be able to salvage those trees. The summer pool comes up almost into this area, and you can see some of the sloughing that's occurring. This happens to be probably, if I could say, is there a prototypical approach to what we'll take in some of these areas? It's going to be a combination of newly vegetated slopes with all riparian and native plant material combined with some riprap for stabilization. That riprap actually extends into the water beyond just the high water area. This is one of those areas where people are simply walking down to get close to the water, but it shows you some fairly significant trees that exist along there and that wave action starting to take out their roots. Some of these trees, frankly, we won't be able to save. Others we think we can save by some of the riprap work that could occur during the shoreline. This is a little bit more refined and open, but the idea is there an opportunity to peel off of that pedestrian path with some steps down to the water's edge? They may be very small. They could be intimate in some areas, and in some areas that's what we're proposing. In some areas, we're looking at opportunities that might be a little bit more grand, closer to areas where we might see congregation of people near that neighborhood park element, potentially out in front of one of those commercial spots. So the character may take on that look with concrete, natural stone, intermixed with introduced vegetation. This is an example of fill that's been placed over time. It's a much finer granule soil than the native soil, and the wave action is very tough on this stuff. It keeps sloughing back to get an angle of repose that it can hold naturally, which ends up being almost vertical in that condition. These areas, we will probably have to slope that back in a gentler condition.
Del, so from what you're saying, the mill, when the mill was operating, they dumped all that there?
Well, we think it was placed at some point in the past, and we're assuming it was done during the mill operations, yes.
Okay.
There was different excavations and placement of soil and stuff that occurred, yes.
But the natural level is where again?
Well, the summer pool is more up in this area through here, but this one was taken last March. There's actually a surprising amount of shoreline that's exposed during the lowest level of the river. This condition is more of a trough type condition in the area where we're looking at the swimming beach occurring and the dog park. This was we feel this is an excavated area as well that created that trough. So we'd look to probably take out some of this soil, fill it in so that we have sort of a natural original angle that was created along that shoreline. Now, in the area where we're talking about the swimming beach and the dog beach, it's heavily vegetated with non-native plantings. It's primarily a black locust. And it's overtaken those areas. It's almost a weed in that area. So we're looking to clear those out and probably introduce plantings that are more sustainable in that area and more riparian in nature, and hopefully none that have the thorns that those trees have. So this is the beach along NIC, so the character that hopefully could be reproduced would be very similar to this, and we think that the natural slope from the water's edge up to that right-of-way through there probably was closer to what exists down there. What might happen there, that soil that's been placed out and some of this that's been cut out, this would be removed. Some riprap work would happen down here at the base, continuing beyond the high water mark, and then maybe there's some opportunities for steps or such to take people down to the water's edge. And in the swimming beach, of course, you wouldn't have a need for this. But some of the banks, fairly steep. So I'll quickly take you through some of these things that I don't believe they've changed from when we met with you during the workshop, but this was one of the areas we looked at. Again, it aligns with the road. It's a major view corridor as you would enter off of Celtice on the western side. A commercial lot set in that area. Again, all through here we have a wheeled trail and a pedestrian trail that are along the waterfront. In this area where it's highlighted in yellow, this is the condition that's occurring now. This tree is in jeopardy of losing its roots. This was at high water last summer. So one of the thoughts was, can we come back in, lay these slopes back a little bit, make them a little shallower, do our riprap work along the shoreline, and if there's an opportunity to have some sort of an overlook, create a projection that is set more on pilings, almost as a dock type development, at different levels for viewing, maybe another level for fishing, maybe there's even a floating component. Again, just concepts, but looking at what those opportunities will be coming off of the wheeled section of the trail or the walking section of the trail. Some of these intermediate, smaller circles I'll address at the very end. Those are more those foot traffic ones that are talking about where we have this narrow 2-3 foot wide footpath that goes down to the water. The largest ones that we're looking at, this is the second one. This is that area where I said there's a lot of soil being placed, very fine granules, erosion, heavy erosion occurring. We're going to have to lay those slopes back and shallow them out in a fashion that we're kind of showing here. Maybe looking to those concrete steps combined with rocks and vegetation to stabilize them in these areas. But that red element that you see in the photo right there is a tent. People already use this inlet area as sort of a camp spot, day use on the water. We think it could be enhanced for that type of a use, potentially even enlarged a little bit. It corresponds to another roadway that would be our visual corridor to the water. Some steps or trails down to the waterfront. This is a little bit more of a natural approach to how that we might provide access at this point. As we move a little bit further east, the other major access point that we're looking at also corresponds not only to this neighborhood park component of the shoreline development, corresponds a little bit to the opportunity for a commercial site in that location. That may be representing what that commercial use might be, the park component over here on this side, the wheeled trail moving through here, the ped trail below it, and access down possibly to some steps to an intermediate plaza level or a accessible trail down to the same level. Opportunity to work with those seating steps that you saw in the previous photograph, almost to the point if we could combine that with some sort of a floating dock, excuse me, that it could act as a smaller venue of a performance or even an amphitheater type activity. There was suggestion that an amphitheater might be appropriate in the park area or the park component of the waterfront, but it was moved out as not considered to be a high priority. But we feel that there may be an opportunity to combine a small venue like that with an accessible location along the river, where pilings might be left high, the docks could float up and down with the water level change, catenary lights being hung, et cetera. So this one might have an opportunity to be pretty exciting.
And Del, when you're talking about commercial opportunities, I know for our purposes, we're only focused on the waterfront and the park. That's what Park and Rec does. But I know the city has an interest in how do we pay for all of this. So is it 47 acres, is that right, Bill?
Correct.
So I guess somewhere in that 47-acre parcel, maybe there would be a small restaurant or something that would generate some tax income. And as far as the rest of it, I know farther back, farther from the waterfront, there's consideration of they could build houses, condos, whatever. That's way down the road. But I'm just curious, two things. In your design, if I remember right, there was that housing component was kind of, I think, condominiums.
Yeah,
And I'm curious if,
would you like me to go back to the overall plan?
no, that's okay.
Okay.
I'm just curious if maybe you could also look at, what would it look like as single-family homes on a decent-sized lot rather than condominiums, because I think more buyers are interested in their own place. But, and then also, that's just a thought. But then, Bill, the question is, we go all the way down to right before Lance Douglas's property, and then that ends, right? And that has, I know that hasn't been resolved, but does your plan, Del, show any kind of connection to that, to Mill River?
Well, right now, the city's right-of-way bisects the property that you're talking about that Mr. Douglas owns.
Yeah.
So the trail could conceivably continue through his property on the city's right-of-way. But under the Atlas plan, the development that we're showing now stops at the western edge of the Atlas property.
Okay.
So, Commissioner, we have every intention of pulling this trail all the way through to Mill River at some point and beyond. We'd like, I think, when we get to Grand Mill itself, we'll probably have to, not probably have to, we will discuss this with those property owners there, because the trail will go in front of their homes. And so in order, we would run that railroad right away through there, and we have to plan that. But the intention is to go all the way to Hutter and then tie this in with the Prairie Trail that's up above. So we have one large loop system. So it's going to take some time and some patience, but and we've done, Monty McCulley has done an excellent job at mapping these trails out that seem to go nowhere. but at some point they all start to connect. And today you can see how well we've done with that from 15 or 20 years ago.
Okay, thank you.
And to respond to your comments about the housing types, in the master plan at this time, they're looking at 3 different housing types, some individual residential lots, some would be townhome construction, and others would be attached, either apartments or condominium. So there's a mixture that's being looked at.
Okay, thank you.
And the last one that I'll show you, again, in concept, we talked about it at the very earliest discussions when we were talking about the water access to an accessible kayak canoe launch. That diagonal parking that we talked about, under this concept, it was drawn before we had the loop road that would allow you to pull through. This was looked at as a back end. Unload the kayak, canoe, et cetera, bring it down to the trail, bring it down to an accessible route that would get you down to the water, and then have the launch dock in that location. Again, this is sort of a natural jetty that occurs along the shoreline where the old barges would load equipment. We think it provides a nice opportunity for an overlook of some sort, and on the western edge of it, another opportunity for that sort of that step-down access to the water's edge, with a potential for a floating dock component. Here's a view of it from the east, looking back to the west, and this was taken again last March. You can see how that comes out, protrudes into the river.
Dill, were you looking at any dock systems that people could come in on their boat and tie up?
In the overall plan, you may have seen there was consideration early on for some dock. I think that's still a potential for the project, but they're looked at to be limited to a day use moorage only, no overnight stays. Yes.
Okay.
We don't show them along the shoreline, but they were contemplated for this area right in here. You can see these red lines that kind of move through here, and you can see all these areas where we've just walked you through where some of those potential access points may occur. They not only do they correspond to some of the roadways, but they also correspond to some of the greatest needs for some of shoreline stabilization in that area. So I talked a little bit about some of the ones that might get you down to the water, but they'd be a little bit more of an, oh, excuse me. You have a question, Ron?
Yeah, who's going to pay for all this?
Well, it's coming from a number of sources. Some of these shoreline elements that we're talking about now, we don't have the full funding to develop what I've shown you in those last 4 areas of yet. We may have enough funding to accomplish one of those, but the slide beyond this one, we talk a little bit about funding and where some of those funds might be. So there are some upcoming meetings that are continuing between Ignite and the city about evaluating if there's any funding for the Lake District from Ignite CDA that might be able to contribute to some of the pathways, the trail systems, some of the access points along the waterfront. Some of the restoration or mitigation, I know that Phil has been talking to the folks at Avista about the potential to provide funding for some of the plantings that would occur on the shoreline to stabilize it. There's also some discussions with a group who do shoreline restoration that there's potential to have funding that can contribute to some of the riprap, placement of the riprap and the stabilization of the bank that they're pursuing through grants.
Now, is Ignite paying for your part of all this?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure about the contract. I'm a
So what's taking place is that all these concepts are being looked at by you and the public.
By who?
By you and the public. So these concepts, we're just looking at them, then they are just concepts. The fundings have not been identified for all these individual elements. So this will go back to the Ignite board and ultimately come to you and council for approval after everybody's had an opportunity to weigh in on this stuff. So there is some budget money set aside that I've seen that Mr. Burns is working with, but again, none of this stuff has been ratified or voted on to spend the money on these things. These are concepts for us to view. It'll go back to the Ignite board to see how much money they have available to go after all the stuff that Dell is showing you.
Bill, is there, and I don't imagine it would come to Park and Rec, any kind of a budget, because that's not really our role, that'll go to council, but is there a proposed budget for the cost of the improvement?
Phil has got some budget numbers, yes, and I don't know what those are off the top of my head, but it will come back to you. And it's an interesting balancing act because you are the park designers,
Right.
And the Ignite board is the funding source. And so we need to have good communication with them about what we and the public think is the best for this public space.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, going forward, I wouldn't expect it right now, but it would certainly help us to probably prioritize some of these elements because there's a lot of really cool stuff in this and a lot of price tag that goes with many of those elements. Might help to prioritize those if we not tying it down to, precise numbers, but at least getting some ballpark numbers of what each of those elements might bring in terms of cost, in terms of the overall project, so that maybe we can say, okay, this one's really expensive and maybe that's not here yet, but these two might work.
Or we modify that so we can afford something a little not so
Yeah.
grand. Yeah, and I believe Phil and his team is working on that, so there's more of a mix of things you can choose and see what those costs are,
Yeah.
because it's difficult. I mean, I don't know what some of those dock structures, for example, might cost. I would imagine they're real costly. It'd be nice to have one, but I don't know if we could do all three, and maybe we have something more of the step components that get us down to the water's edge and not so grand on all of them, but maybe one closer to the park element is the one that we sink our teeth into that's got the accessible launch and that sort of thing. So that's the kind of stuff that why we're talking about it, to see what might be the best thing, best bang for our buck.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to hear from the public too as to what
Right.
they think
Absolutely.
is the most important.
So where do we go from here? We're here tonight on the 28th. Bill walked you through a few of the dates that are upcoming. We're going to meet in a couple of weeks with a Ped Bike Committee and get their thoughts on some of the trail alignments and movements through the waterfront. There's a meeting with Ignite on the 20th of February, and we're going to present some of the ideas that we were just reviewing as to their opportunity to contribute to some of those being instituted and built. Ultimately, the open house that Bill referenced happens on February 25th. So at that point, the public can weigh in, talk to us about some of the concepts, things like that. And as we move forward beyond that, there's another Park and Rec Commission meeting coming up. Eventually, it goes to council with some some questions for council to direct. Hopefully, we're looking now that it bids in April and open bids and start construction in June of this year. So the construction is also an interesting aspect to what we're going to be doing. In June, our water is going to be up along the river, so a lot of that construction is going to be limited to above the high water mark. We'll work from the top of the bank. The condition when the river drops next year, sometime during the winter, if it's open enough, we'll get down on that shoreline that you saw, the big expanse, and we'll be able to get in and start working with some of that riprap and securing that. So it's over a year's time to develop those elements along the shoreline.
Mr. Chair? Dell, I'd like to tell you that what I like about your presentation, I like it that it's much more natural I think it pays homage to the industry that was on that site for years and that developed this city, which is the lumber mill industry. And so I like that theme, and I hope that going forward with public art or anything like that, that there'd be a real honorarium to what started this city. And I like that it's the natural part, because we have a beautiful park right out those doors, that is a little more less natural. And it's got the colorful swing sets and all the fun stuff, and it's beautiful. But with a second park accessible to the public, I like the feel that it's more natural, so I think you've done a nice job on that. Seems to me that we have a lot to talk about as far as what makes sense to spend the money on. Do we need a road? Why would we tear up an existing trail? Seems like we've got to talk about that. But the good thing is we also have the public that's going to come and tell us what they think in that open house. Mr. Chair, do you see us sticking to this timeline?
Well, and I've asked the question myself. It's kind of in our lap to help facilitate the process of reviewing the park design. And if we feel as a group that things are being rushed to the point where not good decisions are being made, we have the latitude to adjust that schedule and allow more time.
Okay.
So I don't know if, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think that's something we should definitely consider. I mean, and I'm not talking about delaying it by several months because we don't want to lose the opportunities, but not rushing the public on their feedback. If we can delay some of that, and I don't know what the rest of the commission feels, but seems like time's on our side a little bit. So I guess we would work with Bill on that.
You bet, and I agree with you wholeheartedly about the timing of this. I think if we need, as you walk through this, we need more time, we need to find the time to make it right.
Okay. Anybody else?
Can I just say I agree with Christie again?
Well, yes, say
Agree
that
with Christie.
often. Thank
Yes.
you. You know, Ron
Thank you
Nielsen
for
used to say that
speaking
all the
for me.
time.
Yeah, overall, from my perspective, I think getting the opportunity, I think you've done a great job laying out the concepts, and we've got a lot of stuff to work with here. And I think maybe getting some additional input, maybe from the Trail Foundation folks and from the Ped Bike folks as far as routing and what they would see as most advantageous from their perspectives would be very helpful for us as we kind of finalize some of the concepts and hopefully mold this into a workable plan.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to add one more thing. I've been on the commission for a long time, and we've done a lot of projects without any money. And we've had the vision, and once we develop the vision and have a good plan, we've been able to get people excited, and we found opportunities for funding. So I appreciate, Del, you having great vision, you know, looking at what could be, and, you know, it might happen.
Yeah.
So I know there's concern about cost, but if we don't have the vision, it certainly will never happen. So thank you for that.
And I would like to add that not only have we been listening to and visualizing a beautiful concept, but the public did have opportunity a year ago to come to several meetings, and I have met and seen several of you at those meetings. And this is just a jumping off point. This is going to be a great park, and everybody's going to participate in it. And I appreciate all your hard work, Del, because it's never the fun spot to be in that you're in right now. Thank you.
Dale, thank you.
You bet.
Bill, is there any other business you have tonight?
I do not, Commissioner.
Okay. Any other final comments or announcements from the group?
No, sir.
Okay. Well, I want to thank all of you that have come out tonight for the presentation. We certainly look forward to you here on the 25th of February. Please tell everybody you run into to come to the open house, February 25th, 5:30, right here in this room. And please forward comments, the Parks Department. We're anxious to hear your thoughts, and we'll see you in a few weeks. I'll entertain a motion for adjournment.
I so move.
Second.
Motion's been made by Commissioner Ettinger and seconded by Commissioner Tate to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, everybody.